Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. As the Modi government completes 100 days in office, we ask, how should we assess its performance? In part 2, we present an exclusive interview with the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs and Urban Development and also a former president of the Bharatiya Janata Party, Venkaiah Naidu. But first, the crisis in Kashmir. As the army, air force, police and civilian government battle to rescue the state's submerged people, we talk to survivors of the disaster as well as disaster management experts, civil servants and army generals about the challenges facing this beleaguered state. And now joining me to discuss the scale of the challenge facing the people of Kashmir, what went wrong and what needs to be done, is the former Vice Chairman of the National Disaster Management Authority, Shashidhar Reddy, former Chief Secretary of Kashmir, Ashok Jaitley, former Divisional Commissioner, Wajahat Habibullah, former General Officer commanding 15th Corps, Lieutenant General S.A. Hasnain, and one of Kashmir's most famous academics who spent a harrowing time surviving the floods, Professor Amitabh Mattu. Professor Mattu, this morning in The Hindu, you've written about your harrowing experience in Srinagar as the Jhelum flooded 1.5 stories of your family's ancestral home in just 30 minutes. And you've also described the dramatic time you had escaping. For the benefit of those who don't read The Hindu, can you briefly tell me exactly what happened?
Karan, I arrived in Srinagar on Saturday after hearing reports of flooding in parts of the Kashmir Valley to be with my parents, but not really deeply worried about their security because I thought Kokchi Bagh was safe and secure. It was raining on Saturday, but really our house and the neighborhood was completely fine. Sunday morning when I woke up, it was sunny and clear, but at about 9:30 I got a call from the neighborhood that the Jhelum had been breached near Laldev Hospital, about a kilometer from our house, and within minutes it had flooded our garden, and in about half an hour, our ground floor was completely gone. It had moved up by the afternoon to about 1.5 stories, and thereafter we were consistently maintaining a vigil, measuring how far it would go. All our staff, my parents, moved to the upper stories of the house, but that night no one slept, just maintained vigil. Early in the morning, you could see the Indian Army sending boats and rescuing people, and we were rescued at about 10:30 that morning, on the next morning, on Monday morning. It was the most harrowing experience we've had. We had staff with us. We had to manage to carry only food and water, and left with small bags to the Bund, where the flood channel, which is near us and which was at a height, and thereafter the Indian Army left us there. But there you had scores of people there, no sign of relief at that moment, but this is a personal story. My parents have never experienced this. People talk about the 1950 floods, but this was the worst they'd ever seen, and they don't remember that their parents had ever witnessed a scene like this. All of the neighborhood was completely inundated, submerged in water. And after that, it was really the kindness of strangers who helped us traverse through about 5-6 kilometers of water to this place called Barzala Chowk, and it was a lawyer, secretary of the Bar Association, who accompanied us. Thereafter took us in his own car for part of the way to the airport. There were people who I didn't know, random people who I was friends with on Facebook who helped. So ultimately it's really the Indian Army and the kindness of strangers who we met in the streets who helped us reach the airport and take the next flight, which was half empty, the SpiceJet flight, because no one could reach the airport. This is just one story of the most harrowing experience that I have had. There are obviously hundreds and thousands of other stories. We escaped, we managed to survive and come to Delhi, but I do hope that we do something for the people who are still left behind.
Two quick questions, Professor Mattu. In your account in The Hindu this morning, you're full of praise of the army. What impression did you form of the civil administration?
Karan, I think it's important now to not apportion blame at the moment, because there will be a chance for a post-mortem, and I hope that post-mortem, that inquiry, actually identifies what went wrong and what could have been done better. But at this moment, I'd only say that everything else seemed to have collapsed. The Indian Army and the armed forces are the only actors that I encountered, and as I said, apart from the civilians who helped us. But frankly, I would say that the scale of the tragedy, and I don't want to create panic, but I think it's important to drive home the seriousness of the situation. I think no other actor, no other institution in India is capable of handling what's happened in Kashmir except the Indian Armed Forces.
Now, your article in The Hindu ended with a very passionate personal plea to the Prime Minister. I'm going to quote what you wrote. You wrote, "Today, Prime Minister, rescue Kashmir and Kashmiris will respect you forever." Are you suggesting in a paradoxical sort of way that this is an opportunity to build bridges and overcome the alienation many Kashmiris feel?
Karan, I would be hard-pressed to go into the political subtext, but what I can see today when I walked past all these mohallas in Srinagar was a tremendous amount of goodwill for the Indian Army and a kind of latent faith that the Prime Minister will deliver on what he has promised, and in fact some people believing that only he can deliver. If he does deliver, clearly this is a great tragedy, and where we have to act no matter what the political consequences are. But if today the nation stands behind Kashmir, there will obviously be a great deal of affection and endearment of the people towards the Prime Minister and the Indian Armed Forces. But I think this is a human tragedy, irrespective of whatever the political consequences are, which has to be addressed, and it can only be addressed nationally. I think the state government, let's be frank here, will not have the capacity. It never anticipated this. No one really anticipated the scale of this tragedy. And there really are three elements that you need to take care of right now. Is coordination. I think we need a single point of coordination, a unified structure, perhaps led by the Chief Minister, but really coordinated by the armed forces.
Okay.
Then the second, apart from coordination, is communication. Because what we experienced, because there were no mobile phones, no landlines, and no electricity, that was spreading panic, and it's still spreading panic as relatives and friends of people who are in Kashmir are calling up. If we can, through satellite phones and tether to computers, at least set up call centers and perhaps give a chance, even for a minute, for people to communicate through the social media, that would be absolutely great. The third is care. So the three C's are coordination, communication, and care. I think what you need to do is to help all these people who are marooned there and who will be rescued finally, hopefully, to in tents and create the kind of structures which can enable them to live a life of whatever dignity is possible at the moment. At the moment, gurdwaras and mosques and other places, apart from what the government has set up, are accommodating them. But I think that is the third issue that we need to focus on.
Professor Mattu, thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us. I know you've been through a harrowing time. We wish you and your parents very well and a safe recovery from that awful experience. I want to now focus on three key questions for the rest of the show, gentlemen. I want to begin briefly by trying to ask the question, what went wrong? Shashidhar Reddy, there are reports that there were advance warning of heavy rainfall, which should have led to the evacuation of people. There are even reports on other channels that the Chief Minister tried to order the evacuation of people, but those people refused to evacuate. Do you think, once again, our system of evacuation, of heeding warnings, and perhaps the response of the people who simply refused to evacuate, despite the fact they could be affected, that system doesn't work properly?
Well, I think I see a lot of similarities between what we've seen in Uttarakhand and here. The IMD has given its warnings. Of course, even this time the IMD's warnings forecast has been, I think, reasonably precise. We've had rainfall which was way too heavy and unexpected. But what was lacking, and not only in India, but I think elsewhere in the world also, where there is a mountainous terrain and forecasting becomes a very big challenge as for the hydrological agency in any country. This is what we've experienced in, of course, we didn't even have this much time in Uttarakhand. Okay. There was time here, but then the systems are not in place. And I think this is something we need to be looking at very seriously. Last year, after Uttarakhand, we started, on 16th it happened, on 19th of June last year, we had convened a meeting, carried this forward. The Prime Minister chaired the meeting of NDMA. We set up a committee headed by the Secretary, Ministry of Earth Sciences.
Let's not go back to Uttarakhand. Let's focus on now.
Yeah.
What you're saying is systems aren't in place, and the first fault is that even though we had advance warnings of floods, even though the Chief Minister allegedly gave orders for evacuation, those orders weren't heeded or they weren't fulfilled, and people didn't evacuate. Ashok Jaitley, you've been Chief Secretary in Jammu and Kashmir. Another thing that's deeply worrying is that river water drainage channels dating back in some cases, I'm told, to the 15th century, such as the Numbles, such as the famous Nala Mar, have been either covered over by human habitation or actually cemented and converted into roads, thus exacerbating the problem whenever the Jhelum floods. I take it this is something that administrations have consciously been doing for decades, and they're all collectively to blame.
No, I think you're quite right. It does need to be connected, but if you go back into history, you will find that this kind of flood has taken place before, and with the same kind of devastation that we are facing today, except that it is increased in intensity. Even somebody like Walter Lawrence in the 19th century.
But just a moment, let's not go back to history, Ashok Jaitley. What I'm pointing out is who's responsible for the fact that river drainage channels have been deliberately and knowingly blocked up, some cemented into roads, others covered with human habitation. Who's responsible for that?
No, I suppose one could accuse the government of being responsible for not attending to the immediate problems, but the fact is that the whole ecological system in Kashmir is being affected not only by the governance.
But you're deflecting now to a different issue. We'll come to the ecological system later on. Let's stick to one issue at a time, otherwise the audience will think you're deflecting. Gujarat Habibullah, you've been Divisional Commissioner Kashmir. I'm going to put that same question to you that Ashok Jaitley didn't seem to want to answer. Who's responsible for the fact that critical river drainage channels, in some cases dating back to the 15th century, like the Numbles and the Nala Mar, have been cemented over and built up with habitation? That's exacerbated the Jhelum floods when they happen. Who's responsible for this?
Well, actually, I was not only the Divisional Commissioner of Kashmir, but actually was looking after the Lakes and Waterways Development Authority also. The problem has been there for some time. It's all very well to think to fix this responsibility. I think the whole of society is responsible, because not only has government sanctioned, as you mentioned, the Nala Mar, now a road goes over where the Nala Mar stood, where the Nala Mar drained the thing. The whole valley was crisscrossed with channels and canals. There was a Zengir canal, there was a Nala Mar canal, there's the Amir Khan canal. There are a number of canals and numbers where the water would actually accumulate. Over a period of time, yes, you may accuse the government that the governments have been irresponsible, but the public has also encroached on these. You will find in Bemina, which is the road which leads from out of Srinagar towards the Baramulla side, the whole area is built up. These used to be wetlands. These were wetlands. What Numbles are wetlands.
Okay.
These are the places which should absorb the floods. These have over the period of time been built up. There has been encroachment. There has also been apathy by the government, you may say so, because we lulled ourselves into the belief over many, many years that perhaps this kind of flood would not happen again.
Okay.
Whereas over generations, not only the 15th century, right from the time of the King Lalitaditya, efforts have been made to control the rivers and to regulate them.
Well, in fact, we talk about efforts being made to control the rivers and regulate them. Shashidhar Reddy, I'm going to come back to you very briefly before I go to General Hasnain here with me. Something else that's exacerbated exacerbated the problem is the deforestation of the Kashmir hills. I gather from accounts that in fact streams are now gushing down deforested stretches such as Sukhnag and Rambian, adding to the chaos and the turmoil in the valley. So it's a combination, it seems to me, of multiple things that have allowed this situation not just to happen, but to happen in this exacerbated way. Warnings being not heeded, people being unwilling to evacuate even though been told to evacuate, the drainage channels being allowed to build up upon and roads being built on them, and then the deforestation which makes the whole thing worse. It's almost as if at many multiple levels we failed ourselves. Not just the governments, but we as people also have failed ourselves.
No, I think you're quite right that, there are multiple channels which have been at work and sometimes at cross purposes. But I still believe very strongly about the climate change that has been taking place over the years, over centuries. And we have not, as a government of India and the state government got together and put together a mechanism which can look at this whole change.
Mr. Jaitley, I want to stop you on climate change because climate change is a bigger issue. Climate change has been happening for, as you say, centuries. Others say, in fact, it's a questionable thing how much climate change is happening, but it's not something that is directly responsible for the problem that we're having in the immediate short term. I want to come to you, General Hussain, because at the moment the army is battling to try and save lives, to rescue the submerged, but at the same time its own Badami bag cantonment is underwater. There are some 4,200 soldiers submerged, 380 families that are stuck.
Yes.
Tell me, what will be the situation in Badami Bagh? This is water that's poured over the Band.
Absolutely.
I take it this is now stagnant water in Kashmir.
Absolutely.
How does it drain out?
This is the major problem in that area. In fact, flooding in Kashmir means that the water overflows the Band and goes into the low-lying areas. Now, Badami Bagh is one of those low-lying areas. And what I was told last, Badami Bagh had about 10 to 14 feet of water at one time. To my mind, there is no way by which this water can go back over the Band again, because the drainage channels themselves are, I think, blocked. The sanitation has all mixed up with this water.
So
to my mind,
does the water now have to just dry up? Is that the only solution?
It appears to my mind, I do not know it scientifically, but I think this will take a long time for it to drain out. And we do not have the kind of pumping sets and that kind of equipment to be able to dry it out in a quick frame of time.
If you have massive stagnant water that won't drain out quickly, then you have a health hazard as well on your hands.
That is the major thing which is going to face the authorities in the very next few days. And I would suggest that along with the evacuation, along with provision of food and water, the most important thing is going to be the requirement of paramedics and doctors there, which must be flown in at the earliest.
Shashidhar Reddy, as a former Vice Chairman of the National Disaster Management Committee, what do you think is the essential assistance that the state needs from the centre?
Well, I think what General Hussain has talked about, restoration of communication is going to be extremely important. All these mobile connectivity has lost, and I'm sure that will be taken up on our war footing. Then certainly health will be a concern. Then reaching out to people in areas which are really cut off. Roads have been damaged because of landslides and things like that. All those things, reaching out essential supplies, what we've seen in Uttarakhand, how the mountainous terrain makes it difficult for us to reach. So I think food and essential supplies. Now, other important
I take it medicine is another important thing. Paramedics and medicine to ensure that the stagnant water, which now can only dry up, as General Hussain says, it won't drain.
Damaged houses are going to be, a major concern, because very soon the weather is going to turn cold, and then we need to really reach out to all those people who are homeless, and then ensure that they are properly protected.
Ashok Jaitley, very quickly, you heard Professor Mattu talk about the importance of communication, both in terms of the authorities communicating to the people to the extent they can, but also setting up telecommunication links so that people don't panic and those outside Kashmir don't fear for their loved ones. How critical do you think that is at this stage?
Are you asking this to me?
I am indeed, Mr. Jaitley.
Yeah, no, I think it can be done fairly quickly, provided all the organizations get together and have a combined effort. But at the moment, people have been working in different directions, and that doesn't help matters. So I think you need a combined effort between the Congress, between the state government, the central government, and the army, the services,
Okay.
and they work in one direction.
All right, that's a very good point. We
And
need unity
therefore
of purpose. Let me bring you in, because the army is an expert at actually setting up systems when there is devastation around. How quickly can army engineers set up essential communication links?
You see, first of all, Badami Bagh itself is paralyzed because that's a low-lying area. I think the next physical asset to which the command and control elements of 15 Corps can move, and 31 sub-area which exists there, is the airport area. The airport area is very safe, and that is the place where everything should move and the communication links should be established. Actually, it is quite surprising that almost all communication links, including the army's links, are down at the moment. And everyone is battling for this. Equipment is being flown in. What I can perceive is equipment reaching the airport, but movement of equipment beyond the airport is posing a major problem.
Whose responsibility is that?
Oh, well, at the moment there is no central command and control authority, and I think that is the most important thing which must be established immediately. And the army, I think everyone is agreeing on that, is the most capable authority which can actually establish.
Is there a sense in which, in fact, the civil administration should make the army the first center of authority in handling this crisis until rehabilitation fully happens?
Absolutely. That is exactly what should be done, with total authority in the hands of the Corps Commander.
You've been Divisional Commissioner in Kashmir, Wajat Habibullah. Do you think that's good advice from General Hassan, that in the first instance, given the depth of the tragedy, and you heard Professor Mattu describe it in extremely graphic terms, General Hussain is saying that the civil government should actually hand over control for a while to the army and let them get on with rehabilitation and rescue?
Well, I don't know if that is actually necessary. It is important that the two work together closely. The two working together closely have worked successfully in the past, and it will work successfully in the future also. The point is that it is not only the military and other security requirements that are at present disrupted. The fact is that relations do not have connection with their own relations, contact with their own relations. I am getting messages through roundabout means. I am actually communicating through the administration in Jammu, who can actually contact people inside the valley to get information through and to get things done. But the point is that the civil administration is quite capable of looking after this, but the civil administration, there is no doubt, and I would agree with Atta Hasnain in this point, the civil administration has to work very closely with the military administration, and this civil administration has to work right from the top to the bottom. This has not been a satisfactory relationship in the last few years. It should be made a stronger relationship, and they must work together now very closely.
I'm going to very quickly bring in Shashidhar Reddy. I want you, Mr. Reddy, to address that implied criticism from Mr. Jaitley that there are many different agencies, but they're not necessarily working in a coordinated fashion. And the one advice he was giving is that they need to coordinate their efforts and work under a sense of central control. Do you agree that that's a relevant criticism and a correct criticism at the moment?
Yes, in a situation like this, there's always issues of coordination, and then I think this is something that we need to lay down systems for future. We've started working on this, and I think coordination between different agencies, and usually what we have seen in Uttarakhand was, it takes a little while, but then everything will certainly fall in place, and I think how quickly things fall in place is something that we need to
very
really
quickly
watch.
General Hussain, you're hearing Mr. Reddy say that things take a little time before they fall in place, but eventually they will fall in place. But as you know, when you're marooned, time is of the essence, and those people whose lives are about to be submerged underwater, their houses are crashing, there's a threat of epidemic, don't have time on their side. So is that another area where the army can step in quickly and respond, were it to be given the sort of first rung of coordination of the whole process?
Absolutely. You see, this is a special situation, something quite different to all other areas. Ladakh, we had a similar kind of a disaster 3 years ago. These areas you have to realize are cut off. First of all, the Jammu-Srinagar highway itself is cut off. The only place to which the communications are going in is the airport itself, from where everything is flowing.
Is this the sort of situation where the army is the best?
I think the army for the next few days, it's not as if it's going to be something of a permanent nature, but for the first few days, maybe the next 2-3 weeks, they are the best agency
and in a
to
nutshell,
organize.
is the army, which is also responsible for border security, and that's a critical job, capable of taking on another task which is equally important? A quick answer.
In many ways, the army has been already doing it in lots of things in the hinterland.
But it can take on the additional burden.
It can take it on. It has the capacity to be able to meet this challenge completely.
We're going to have to leave it there, but this is clearly an issue to which we're going to return, and I can see ourselves coming back to this subject tomorrow, because the crisis in Kashmir has not only captured newspaper headlines, but it is a devastating and heartbreaking story of human endurance as well as human tragedy. Undoubtedly, we'll be back to it tomorrow, but my thanks to all my guests for joining me today, and in particular my thanks to Professor Mattu for sharing with us